Welcome back to the Sound Design Podcast. Nice to have you all back. As you already hear, we're speaking English today. This is our first English-speaking guest. Our guest today is Enyang Urbiks. She's a mastering engineer and artist herself. We are in her beautiful studio in Berlin Funkhaus. Welcome, Enyang. Nice to have you here.
Hi, Max. I'm really happy to be joining this podcast this time and share more about my mastering philosophy and my way of approach to technical side of it. And please join our conversation and also reach me if you have any other questions later on.
That's very nice from you. So, what is the job as a mastering engineer?
I see this process very artistically. I know some people just consider it technically, but for me, it's a process after production, after mixing. It's the process that you put more 3D dimension into the sound structure. So therefore, evoking more emotion in the sound. If I speak about art, like the art that you can see, mixing would be a little bit more like painting, but mastering would be a sculpture. So I'm giving more liveliness to the sound to make it more 3D.
And would you say that a master track is then more haptic? As you said, you compare it to a sculpture rather than a painting. Is there something you can more grab onto, like the material is more polished?
It is polished, and I guess also in the sculpture, the artist means has an intention where the people should give a focus to. Maybe there is a sculpture of Medusa, then people will be like more focusing on the head and eyes. So I think that's also what mastering can do, having this sculptic way of approach.
Does this approach differ from song to song or from genre to genre for you?
I mean, classically, mastering was aimed for albums. So it is important that every song in the album is coming to coherence. So, like a book, it's a novel, and every chapter is giving you different mood, but at the end, every chapter should create the consistency to bring you to the interesting, exciting conclusion. So every song should play its own role, and every song is characteristic in its own way. But every song next to each other, it should make sense, and everything should be like one book, like an album at the end. And this is also a pretty similar approach when it comes to an EP these days.
Okay, and you already said there are differences in mastering, mixing, and producing on an everyday working basis. What are the differences between mixing and mastering, for example?
For me, I always maybe sound too art, like from the art point of view, and it's not too technical maybe. But for mixing, I think people should have more macroscopic perspective, which means the mixer has an eye for or ears for how the guitar sounds, how the vocal sounds. So it's more about this broad term of sound. And for mastering, I think you come down more to the detail and microscopic perspective. So you're looking at the whole song. When you're mastering, you're not trying to fix the sound of the guitar or trying to make the guitar louder or quieter. But it's more about how the guitar's position is when you look at the whole song, or how the frequency balance is when you look at the whole spectrum of the frequency of the song. So always finding this balance is really important in mastering.
Let's come a little bit to your biography as a mastering engineer. When and why did you decide to become a mastering engineer?
In the beginning, I didn't know that I was doing mastering. I'm an artist. I was making music. I'm still making music a lot, and performing. And in the past, I was making music and I was playing that on stage. And I was wondering, why doesn't it sound like other songs that I like? Why doesn't it really like bring the impact when it comes to the drop? So I was researching, I was reading a lot. Watching videos was also an option, but I don't like videos. And then I got more into mixing. It was still not enough. There was something missing. And then I realized what I was missing was mastering, and that's what I was really digging myself into for quite a long time. So I started to do that myself. And funnily, my friends and my friends' label, they were also coming to me and asking me to work on their releases and compilations. And so I just slided into this mastering game very naturally. They were all going back very happy and started to bring their friends. So now it became like friends of friends. And at the same time, I met a mastering engineer, also based in Berlin. He was telling me he's looking for an intern, and preferably female, because I think female engineer would bring different perspective to the sound. Like, we listen differently, which is quite true, than how he does. So he would like to have this comparison in work. So the next day, I went to the studio. I started to work there. And he just let me work in his studio, build my own client base, and start to work in his studio as well. So I did that. So that was the beginning that I started to make money, and then it became more and more clients. So now I'm here. In the beginning, it started with my friends, but now my clients are really all over the world. It's a funny thing.
Yeah, that's true, and it's a nice and yeah, as you already said, you slide it into it naturally. It sounds really organic. Would you say that there's a need to learn mastering, like in production school or whatever, or is the DIY approach? Is it yeah? How important is it to be taught in mastering, or do you have to do it?
There are many famous music schools around us, like SAE. Also, there is another school here in Funkhaus. But for them, it's really difficult to have mastering as a teaching content, because like I ask SIA students, like how much time do you spend like learning mastering in your school? Maximum 4 weeks. It's really, I can understand why, because it's really more about the students listening and changing the perspective, and really you need to explore in this microscopic world. But most of students would have macroscopic perspective. So if you look at the mastering world from macroscopic perspective, it's not much. You have an EQ, you have compression, but much little compression than in mixing world, and some limiter, maybe some saturation. That's all about it. So like how much far you can go to learn this in school, I think this is quite limiting. So, but if you do this, if you try to learn this alone by yourself, or go to another professional mastering studio, you will slowly adjust your perspective to microscopic world. Then you see how much far detail you can dive into. So I think this only makes sense when you do, like when you really take all the time yourself and explore. What was really important for me from learning was comparing different DA converters sound. So we might think that, I mean, this is not making any sound, or it's not an instrument. It's just practically converting from analog signal to digital signal, or the other way around. But every company and every model offers such different quality in conversion, which makes the master sound, I mean, maybe for other people it's not much sound, but as a person who has a microscopic perspective, it's a huge difference. So if you start to catch this, then you really get into the magic of mastering, and you cannot get out of it.
That's true, and it's interesting that you mentioned the AD-DA converter, as it's such an essential part of not just your job, but of everyday life. For example, speaking into your phone, you have a converter in there, or I don't know, any other situation. There are so many situations, so these converters are super important for digital societies and we live in. And it's interesting that you mentioned that exactly this piece is important for your sound or your approach. It's I don't know, that just makes me think about it a little bit. But let's come to your approach. As you already mentioned, you have a more artistic than technical approach to mastering. Why is that?
So for technical approach to the mastering, I think everyone can learn from the books and apply this knowledge into mastering. And at the end comes to quite similar sounding masters. And artistic mastering, of course, it already has the foundation of technical knowledge, but from that point of view, you're going more into the detail, more into understanding the artist and trying to bring that into the sound. This kind of approach is something that is often forgotten, or this technical engineers, they don't even think of it this far. So I think this artistic approach is something what makes a difference in our time, and especially when nowadays machines or AI can take over all the logical way of mastering. This is something what everyone can do, and artistic approach is something what makes me different, I believe.
Yeah, I think it comes from your past, or not just past, but from your artistic personality too. As you said, you started as a musician, making music, doing stuff on the computer with your music, and then slowly noticing actually it's more into mixing and mastering, finally mastering, and so maybe this is like it's connected to your approach. Would you say that?
I think that's one part. That is really one part. And on top of that, I'm really interested in understanding the artist and what this artist wants to express, and really reading this and trying to deliver this into the sound. So there's a lot of psychology in it. There's a lot of spiritual part in it. I speak with artists very much. Like I spend a lot of time in communication, which other engineers like to like hire another person to do all the email communication, and but I do that all myself because I think that's actually the most important part in it. Yeah.
And let's go a little bit more detailed into the process of mastering. Sometimes you get a mixed song, and you hear, okay, the mix, I wouldn't say it's bad, but it needs drastic changes. Doesn't matter if it's bad or good or what, but you just hear, okay, there's something missing, or there's something I have to push. How do you decide if there's a subtle change that is needed or a drastic one?
So when you see an incoming project request and it's coming from like a more structured label, like bigger labels, and bigger labels usually have a mixing engineer, professional ones, and they already went through the whole team to ask, do you like this? Is this approved?
Yeah.
So, and then after that, they came to me. So when I see that there is a bigger label structure involved, that means I probably need to leave the sound of the mix as it is. Don't change anything drastic, but just try to open the dimension, just try to enhance something, this magical touch to it. So I do very little. And when I know that the mix is coming from a smaller producer or self-produced, self-mixed artist, in that case, of course, I mean, there are many good mixes coming from this environment because so many people are now so talented. You only need a laptop and a headphone to be able to create a really nice mix these days because the technology is also really good and people are so skillful.
Yeah.
But when I hear that there is something lacking still, like a lot of changes needed, then of course I write a feedback, what should be improved and what should be changed. And we do mix revision. And you reach the point that, okay, this person is not that skillful that I cannot like push him to do more revisions. Then I then go into the mastering in that point. Maybe I need more drastic mastering, and because I mean, this is really like a psychology, like because the artist made the music, and she's the only person involved. She's usually happy to have another person's point
Sure.
of view. So more open for me to like change something drastically and not upset about it. So yeah, this is the option.
In general, there are, I would say, two ways to deliver a mix to you. One is the complete track, and the other one is something that is called stem mastering. For our listeners, what are stems?
Oh yeah. So the first one was stereo mastering, and then the second one you're saying is stem mastering. Stem mastering is mastered from stems, which is grouped instruments. So you probably have a lot of like different guitar layers and a lot of vocal layers. So you group them into vocal stem or guitar stem. So like at the end, I have maybe like 5 to 8 stems, and I master from these because then I will have more control over certain detail frequency. I can even automate the level loudness of some areas if needed. I can even put some effect or EQ only on specific stem. So I have more control.
And after the stem mastering, which means you will master all the groups separately, would you then do a stereo mastering afterwards again, or will you just master all the stems and leave it like this?
This is coming down to your preference. There is really no one written rule, but how my work process is I do single stem processing digitally with plugins, and then I put every single stem into an analog summing machine. As you see, this dangerous device on the bottom row. You can put each stem into each channel and sum that with some harmonics effect. And like, for example, if you bounce stereo mix on your computer, this is already all summed up digitally on your laptop or computer. And I am taking that part myself and summing up all the stems in analog environment. And there's electricity gluing all these stems together. In this process, it's making a lot of magic that you cannot explain. And this is already a big sound enhancement.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And then there's more conversion involved
as well.
You will get the digital stems or stereo master, and then you put it back into the analog world, and then putting it back into the digital world, and then finally, when you listen to the finalized track, you have it in the analog world again. Is this a problem when there are too many conversion steps from digital to analog, analog to digital, and back and forth, back and forth?
When it's coming out of the analog machine, there's always some kind of noise level adding up to it. So I think it depends on also like if it is controlled noise level or equal amount of noise level, or is it even from like the noise level summed up from like basically from a good gear or like unreliable gear. Because I think also the noise has shape and how even it sounds. So for example, in our studio, we have a power bank. So the power is going into the power bank and being charged in it, and it's coming out for studio use in an equal level.
Oh, okay.
Because so many other places, it can be unequal, uneven.
Yeah.
So if the going in and going out I think it can create some kind of artistic sound. I mean, also noise is not always bad, but if it is controlled and polished and it's intentional, then I guess we can also create something.
I guess I have one technical question for you. As you already said, you're more into the artistic approach to mastering, but still, because when we speak about mastering, many people think of mastering like to make things louder or better due to loudness. Is loudness something you think of during your process? And now comes the technical question, because many people working with and in music use compressors for this part. Can you explain what a compressor does? Does it do loudness, or what does it do?
Okay, so I see this more as a two
Sure.
parts, so I'm going to go over the first part. Loudness, I think it can still be a voice to as a character of the sound. So if it is like a punk band, or if it is like a artist that wants to like give you a statement, I think loudness is also very important and play an artistic role. So I have a big respect for that. But in generally, if I generally I try to make the music as loudest as possible in the range that it doesn't hurt the dynamics. So I'm really a fan of keeping the dynamics as it was in the mix. Like the quieter part should stay quieter as it is, and the louder part should rise in the same ratio of rising. So I like to keep this. So that means I shouldn't put any sound signal too much into the limiter. Otherwise, like everything's gonna be pushed up and the ratio is not the same anymore. So while keeping this dynamic ratio, I try to make it as loudest as possible. And I'm not sure how many people are really like interested in becoming like more active in mastering in this podcast audience, but somehow like so many people ask me, is it like, do you master around like -14 LUFS, because there is like this normalization law like on Spotify. But professionally, a lot of mastering engineers really aim for -9.4 LUFS, which is like louder.
Yeah.
And I think also that's the golden ratio.
Okay.
If you aim for -14, which we don't really usually do, your music is gonna be like much quieter than like other songs.
Okay.
And this is also what Spotify website, if you really like dig into the corner, it also explains, if you master louder than -14, please just deliver us the song peaking at -2.
Okay.
So it's not when you're just like shrinking the master file into like that it's peaking at -2. It's not changing the sound, it's not changing the dynamic, it's just becoming all like smaller, like equally. So when this goes on Spotify, it sounds good. It's not quieter. It's not like so yeah, Spotify is also offering this information, but they just don't talk about it loud.
Okay.
So yeah, you can master at -9.4 without losing any dynamics most of case. And
how do you reach that loudness level? Do you pump it up with amplification or with compression?
there's no written rule, but what I like to do is that I use a lot of output gain of the mastering console, and input gain and also output gain from what it goes out from my DAW.
Yeah.
So digitally, because what you boost a lot from the analog console, it will also increase like the noise level, and also it can make the sound a little bit muffled if you use like 3 dB, 4 dB too much. So I like to go like clean, just like lifting up like from the DAW digital gain.
Yeah.
And what you add on EQ and output gain from my console and coming back to my computer, and there is a limiter that's adding I'm usually going like 1 dB from one limiter, and I have another limiter that is going for like a 3.4, but of course this is not a written rule. I always tweak it around, and I also tweak it around like this. You need to like tweak everything around to see which is the golden ratio, because if you push too much from the input gain of the mastering console, it's making the sound darker. And if I go more from the output gain of the mastering console, it's making the sound a little bit more brighter. So depending on how you want to shape the sound and where it's like working out the best, I always need to find out.
Okay. And you already mentioned you're working with limiters. What is the difference between a compressor and a limiter?
It's working pretty similar, but limiter is basically, the knee, the shape of like where it should be compressed or limited. Basically, limiting is that the knee is at infinity. So everything that is going above this line of the knee is just being cut off.
Okay.
So a lot of mastering engineers express that as pushing into the wall. So everything that is like pushed above this line is just being not existing anymore. And compression, I think already the definition, like how it sounds, already explains a lot. It's like it's compressing. So if there is any like louder signal, you're pressing that down and it's giving more density, of course. It sounds much more maybe natural and organic by doing this. But yeah, this peaking out frequencies, peaking out the signals will be like a little bit pressed down. And this is highly used, like often used in mixing. And because you are pressing and making everything at equal, kind of like similar around range, you can go bigger, like if there is more peak, there is not so much room that you can go bigger anymore. So this is a method that is used often in mixing if you are aiming for like louder music. But in mastering, I am not using such hard compression. And you shouldn't. I believe you shouldn't.
Why shouldn't you do that?
I said this also a little bit before, but my philosophy is that I need to keep the dynamics of the mix. And if I use too much compression, again, the louder area will be getting smaller in mastering. And then if I compare this master to the mix, the ratio comes out really different, the dynamic ratio.
Yeah, I see that. It makes sense. Totally makes sense to me. So it's actually the way around. People in music technology and music business think of mastering, making stuff loud, compressing it, and you say your approach is to, sure, I will make it a little bit louder, but I will keep the dynamics untouched in the best situation. It will stay untouched, but everything is going to get a lift. Let's switch the topic just a little bit. You sent me a track, about which we can speak a little bit. It's from Lex Fuller, and the track is called Solitude.
Is it alright? You never replied to me. No, you never replied to me. What's it gonna take for you to take all my problems seriously? Do I need to explain myself again? Do I need to take control?
Can you tell me a little bit more about Lex Fuller?
They are Lex Fuller. They are located in New York City. They found me a year ago through the work that I did for Arca, and they wrote me first to check back with the mixes. The mixes that she made, the songs that she made. We were in contact for a very long time, like exchanging emails to make the mix better. We were calling, emailing, and it was so many exchanges that at some point I thought we're not like mastering anymore. But then they came back this year in May, so we're here again, finally mastering their mini album.
What did you try to achieve with mastering the track?
When I listened to her mix, I had a strong imagination of her voice, really like standing strong in the middle, and everything else organically vibrating around her. It was very orientated in nature, in the forest, and it's a sad song, but it had to have a lot of bright side. So that's what I was trying to achieve through sound.
I think I like it here. The rainy water drops all coming down to refresh me. I never felt like this before. Oh, would you come inside with me and we can explore?
What do you normally do first with a mix or the stems when you get them sent?
If we want to go really like into the detail, I first, usually artists and mixing engineers work at 4,400 or 48,000 sample rate. So as a mastering engineer, I prefer to work at 96,000 sample rate. So I bring that into RX to upsample to 96,000. And then I create a project on my Logic DAW. I align all the stems that they go into the summing machine, and I start applying plugins to each stem. And I think for this project, I had minimal EQ setup on every stem, and also on vocal there was a compression and also soothe EQ. This is a really beloved EQ of all the engineers that takes resonances, sharpness of voice, but also strings and synth and hi-hats. It's so versatile. So I'm using Soothe on stem mastering very often. And yeah, and then this goes into the master chain.
And how often do you listen to the track before you start the process, or do you start right away? I know there's not a number. I always listen 10 times or stuff like this, but do you take yourself time? I said maybe for 30 minutes or whatever. Do you plan with listening time before mastering, or do you just start right away?
When I receive the final mixes or stems, I check that the formats are right, and I check that it's not with any like additional limiter on the files. I would listen casually for fun and for getting into the mood, just casually with my AirPod. But I wouldn't like plan the listening time in the studio and like sit and listen before mastering. It's not really affecting me it's not really like causing any differences. It's more important for me that I'm really like feeling the music and understanding the intention of the music.
Yeah. Okay, so you get the stems or the mix, you load them up into your DAW, and then you use some plugins. You mentioned Soothe. Then you start mastering, summing, everything. Sometimes there will be some difficulties. Were there any difficulties in mastering Solitude, or any special treatments you had to do?
There was a kind of sound that I really wanted to add to it, but I knew that this approach wouldn't usually go into mastering. It would more go into the mixing area. So it's the area that people usually, cut the draw the boundary, and this is usually what you like send a note to my mixing engineer for them to do it. So I was a little bit hesitating to do it, but I just did it. And this is, as I explained a little earlier today, I was adding some minimal EQ processing in every stem, and I have the bass stem sending into a tape machine for tape sound emulation. And of course, by doing that, it's also increasing the volume of the bass. But I felt like this was exactly what was missing. When you look at the sound, when the sculpture, it has to be like steadily standing, but I felt like it was a little bit missing the bottom of the sculpture, and I had to give more volume to the bass and more steadiness to the bass.
Is it because when you listen to the track, you notice there's no kick and there's just a soft bass? Is it because of that you needed a little push this frequency range?
Even if there was no kick, if she mixed it already in the ways that it's more like round and embracing, I think it could have worked out already better. Because not every song needs like kick. Also, not every song needs bass. But even if there is no bass, you still need to find the balance within that frame. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I always look at it like as a sculpture. Like if this song has only bass but no kick, when you only have the bass, like how much higher frequency does it have? So in order to make a good ratio, how much bass do you need in order to make the balance. Yeah.
Refresh me. I never felt like this before. Oh, would you come inside with me and we can explore? Figure this shit out together. You and me. Are you and me? Are you and me? Are you and me?
And also, when you listen to the track Solitude, you immediately notice that there's field recording, if I'm correct, or any synthesized field recording style sounds. But as you already said, yes, there are field recordings involved, which open up the track. And is there any differences when you get the stems, for example, and you have like textures and field recordings? Do you have to master this completely differently, completely different to, for example, guitars or stuff like this? How do you approach textures and field recordings and mastering?
I think, I mean, usually, field recording, most of people go around with a Zoom recorder and record. And they are a very good recording device, but still they come out quite flat. But I think they have such like powerful potential that it's the real sound from the world, from the nature. And if you surround this in the right format, it can be very surrounding. So what I did, for example, in this song is that I created a sand channel to send the this texture, this field recorded sound into reverb, and then to stereo imager. So it's like stretching, and it's a sand effect. It's not like on the stem directly, but as a sand effect. So a little bit more organic.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. So actually, that's a producing process.
Exactly.
Yeah, but you did it in mastering to give it this little push it needed.
Yeah.
And you already mentioned that you do this sometimes to add reverb. Is it a common step in mastering to put everything in a room, to glue everything together?
This is the one classic method. You would do that as a sand channel, as I mentioned. Like you put like 3%, not so much. It shouldn't be like so noticeable. But it is really adding this like openness and this cathedral kind of feeling to it. So yeah, when the song needs this, then I would recommend to use it. But I don't use it like always.
And for Solitude, you already said you put the field recordings into a room. Did you put the whole track into a room too?
No, just one stem. But I know that you can also put the whole stereo mix into this processing when the song needs it.
Okay. I have one last question. But first, thank you for taking your time to join us in this podcast. I have a short question, not a simple one, I guess, but imagine yourself being 60, 70. Will you still do mastering?
I will have a studio in my house, in my future house though, I will be mastering my own music. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I need to like produce, mix, and master my own music. But would I be doing this for other people, like as my career? To be honest, I don't think so.
That's fine. Thank you so much for taking the time, and see you and hear you in the next episode. Goodbye.
Thank you.